Welcome everyone to Behind the Crime Door. I'm glad that you've returned, and today what we're going to discuss or to just kill the child. Now, the list of children who are abducted and killed each year by someone who is not a family member is relatively small compared to the number of missing children or other types of child murder. However, the names of these victims, due primarily to national media coverage, are well known. For example, Adam Walsh, Polly Klaas, Jimmy Rice. There are many, many local cases which do not become the focus of national attention. We all know that Abby and Libby's case is not one of those. Their case has exploded, and they became very well known. National media took up this case. I think it's because of the audio and video that Libby took. nation on missing and exploited children. Unfortunately, less than 5%, which is 3,000 to 4,500 cases, of the child abductions by non-family members are actually reported to the police. And the data show that almost 2/3 of those types of cases involve some degree of sexual assault. They have been referred to as short-term sexually motivated abductions. Now, perhaps surprisingly, merely 200 to 300 of the non-family child abductions are classic abductions or kidnappings, where the children are taken for an extended period of time, transported some distance from the contact point, taken with the intent to keep, ransom, or kill the child. The best estimates are that there's somewhere between 40 to 150 child victims of abduction by a stranger are killed each year in the United States. And as a percent of all of the missing child reports, perhaps 1 in 10,000 ends in an abduction, murder by a stranger. So most homicide investigators will never have a case like this over the course of their careers. Police involvement in child abduction murder investigations usually begins with a phone call by parents or family to a local police department to report a missing, runaway, or abducted child. The case is typically initiated with the identification of the potential victim as a missing child in 58% of the cases, or with the discovery of the murder victim 23% of the time. Only 9% begin as reports of a runaway child, and an equal percent as abductions. The beginning of the police involvement in these types of cases is different than for general murder cases, which are more likely to start with a dead body or the report of a murder. In the great majority of child abduction murders, the victim is known from the very beginning of the investigation, but what is not known is whether this victim will be found alive or dead. Most reports to the police of a missing, runaway, or abducted child are made relatively soon after someone notices that the child is absent. The short reporting delays that can happen may not seem that important to the course of the investigation. However, the data shows that these delays are much more critical in child abduction murders than in any other type of investigations, because those missing children who are murdered are killed within a very short period of time. Incredibly, in 44% of the cases, the victim was dead within only 1 hour after they were abducted, and 74% of the victims were dead within 3 hours. 91% of the victims were dead within 24 hours after being taken. It was discovered that 22% of the victims were still alive at the time they were reported missing, and related, and perhaps even more alarming was the finding that 42% had already been killed before they were reported missing, which we believe is the case with Abby and Libby. The typical child victim of an abduction murder is a white female who is about 11 years old. She is from a middle-class or blue-collar family who lives in an urban or suburban neighborhood, who is described as a normal kid who is not thought of as high risk in any way. And in short, she's just your typical neighborhood kid in a single-family residence, and her relationship with her family is stable, and she's just an average preteen girl. The largest age group of victims, 28%, is comprised of young teens, ages 13 to 15 years old, and Abby and Libby fall within this age group. The victim-killer relationship is very different in a child abduction murder than in any other kind of child murder and all murders. These types of murders are more likely than any others to involve a stranger killer. This kind of victim-killer relationship, where the murderer is a stranger to the victim, defines this particular type of murder. In 53% of these cases, the killer is a stranger to the victim. Now, as the victims of child abduction murders are unique among murder victims, so too are their killers. They share many characteristics with other types of murders, but are unique in other important ways that suggest a different etiology to their predatory behavior, and they require different investigative strategies. Killers of abducted children are somewhat unique among murderers in general, above and beyond their choice of victims. They can be characterized as social marginals. They're not active, successful participants in mainstream conventional social life, but rather they occupy a position in society that is indeed on the edge, brink, border, precipice, or margin. They are not integrated personally or socially into the kinds of relationships or activities that produce and sustain effective self or social controls. Their personal and social attributes establish and define their social marginality. In terms of their socio-demographic attributes, these killers can be typified as white males who on average are about 27 years old. Contrary to the popular belief, child abduction killers are not aged perverts or dirty old men. Their average age is around 27 years old. There are not many juveniles under 18 killers, and most of them are 15 to 17 years old if they are. The great majority of these killers are under the age of 30. A more apparent and significant difference emerges at around the age of 40, where only 9% of the child abduction killers are over 40, compared to 19% of all murderers. Now, the former are younger than the latter, and the most marked differences between the two are at the older ages. 7% of the child abduction killers are between 41 and 49 years old, and only 2% are 50 years or older, with the oldest murderer in the study being 57 years old. In short, child abduction killers are even more male and younger than the average killer. So what does that say to us about Abby and Libby's killer? Well, I think we would just For example, 32% are identified as alcohol abusers, absent any one of the elements, the chances of murder does decline. However, given this kind of group of motivated offenders, it should not be surprising that 57% of them and 57% of the murder victims are simply victims of opportunity. In general, the data suggests that child abduction murderers are not characterized by unusual, bizarre, or weird acts of rituals. There is almost no evidence, less than 1% of the cases, that would indicate that unusual ceremonies or acts had been performed at the crime scene. For example, burnt candles, dead animals, satanic symbols. The extreme rarity of these kinds of acts in child abduction murders is consistent with what is found in all murder cases. Likewise, once the murder has been committed, child abduction killers are much more likely, like 52%, to conceal the victim's body when they dispose of it. In short, They do not want the body to be seen or discovered, at least not easily and quickly. At the same time, the killers of abducted children do not go out of their way to intentionally stage or pose the body. In only 3% of the cases did the killer intentionally pose or intentionally display the victim's body in an unusual way. This rate of public display of the body is comparable to that found for all murders. In summary, child abduction murders are part of a general pattern of violence against children, and it's typically with a very strong sexual component. After the murder is committed and the body disposed of, the killer apparently engages in a variety of behaviors that are related to the murder, which for many of them constitute a prelude to apprehension and arrest. The killers do a number of things after the murder, but 6 behaviors are most common and at the same time most telling. 21% of these child abduction killers left town right after the murder. 18% confided in someone about their involvement in the murder, and 17% followed the case in the media. 10% actually interjected themselves into the murder investigation in some way. Of course, skipping town or moving after the murder or maintaining ties to the murder and in its investigation all may provide leads for investigators to pursue. More striking is the number of child abduction killers who return to the body disposal site. Almost 1/4, 22%, of the killers return to the body after they have not only killed the victim, but have also disposed of the victim and left the crime scene for some meaningful period of time. Of these killers who return, an incredible 81% do so prior to the discovery of the body, and 56% do so within 3 days after the murder. Clearly, a significant proportion of child abduction killers return to the body disposal site, particularly soon after the murder has occurred. And as one would expect, very few return after the body has been discovered and reported in the media. So what does this tell us about Bridge Guy? All the things that we've learned today? Well, there's been a lot of speculation around who Bridge Guy might be and what the motive might have been for what happened that day. A lot of people feel that this was a random act and that the girls were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that Bridge Guy was actually out there hunting that day, looking for victims. This may very well be the case. It certainly would not be anything that would go against what we've learned today about these types of killers. But what I do want to say is that I feel this case is not typical. I feel that this case is completely atypical. When we look at all of the information that we have regarding Abby and Libby and what happened to them and what we know now today, I think we can pretty much surmise that it's a high possibility that these girls were catfished in some way on social media based on what we know and what has been reported since December 6th. Now, with that being said, it still doesn't mean that our killer is not falling into the category of a deviant, a person who may have issues with holding down a job, who may be still living at home, who may not be married. All of those things could still be very, very possible with the killer that we're looking at. So I think what we need to do when we look at the case and we look at the possible persons of interest that could be possibly being looked at by law enforcement, I just think that we need to keep an open mind and not put ourselves in any type of box with tunnel vision, because I still go back to when the investigators told us that when Bridge Guy is finally caught, we all are going to be shocked. And I'm not sure what that meant exactly, but I don't next video will be out. So you all take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you next time.